Yo guys, what is up? Mike's on a Diablo 4 video, and today we're going over the mid-season patch notes for Diablo 4. Now, I'm pretty glad that they're doing this. They talked about doing this a little bit ago, but this is going to be a big balance shift to the game mid-season, which kind of prolongs the amount of time that you can play the game because they're just buffing underperforming things here. Note that they're not really nerfing anything that was too powerful. This is more to bring other things that were underperforming up in line, which should also increase build diversity. And with that, guys, let's get right into it. So to start, they buffed the amount of healing that you get from potions, which is pretty crazy. I think this is partly, in fact, because we just have so much more health than we used to. So now potions will heal you more for that. They're buffing the aspect of the protector, reducing the cooldown from 30 to 20 seconds. They're buffing Andariel's visage by 50% and making the Poison Nova spawn on enemies. I've actually been playing an Andariel's rogue build that I will have a build video out that's probably playing on screen right now. I did a pit 60 without a single piece of gear masterworked at level 90. It's one of the strongest builds that I've played, and they just buffed the damage of the build by 50%, which is insane. It blows my mind. I think we could also see an Andariel's Druid build, maybe using Claw for lucky hit procs, and just going full attack speed and trying to proc as much Andariels as you could. But the fact that they just buffed this unique by 50% is disgusting. That might be one of the stronger dot builds in the entire game now. I was doing a billion dot damage before on a perfect rogue build, and now it's gonna be doing even more. So that's pretty crazy. Next up, they're buffing the Shadow Explosions on Doombringer by 100%. They're buffing Starless Skies. Starless Skies was already one of the best in slot rings for resource cost reduction and damage. It's going to give you more damage and more resource cost reduction, up by 10%. 50% less resource cost on just a ring is insane. They're buffing up Tyrael's Might by 100%, the damage from the barrage, which is pretty nice. They're reducing the stat requirements on Paragon boards from 90 to 60 for non-main stats, which is really nice. I had to do a lot of very specific pathing on our max roll Paragon boards to get the things that we needed, swapping out lots of willpower for int or strength or whatever, or dex. So this is pretty cool. It's going to make building your Paragon boards easier. Next up, we get to Barbarian. They buff Whirlwind by 15%, Violent Whirlwind to a 5% increase. They buffed Call of the Ancients. They buff Frenzy. They buff Flay Bleed. Flay was already doing some pretty crazy bleed things, if I'm not mistaken, and just buffed more aspects of Flay. They changed Pressure Point, where it used to be your core skills. Now they've added core and weapon mastery skills, so you've got more avenues for vulnerable. They buffed up the amount of bleeding that Thorns can do. Walking Arsenal, they slightly increased. Tempering Blows, they buffed. Stalking Aspect, they also changed, so now it was just specifically rend. Now it's when a core skill deals direct damage to a bleeding enemy, just making more avenues for builds work. This is disgusting. They buffed Whirlwind Dust Devil damage by 100%. Whirlwind Dust Devil was already one of the higher speed clearing type of builds for Barbarian, and now they're not only going to be doing speed clearing, but you're probably able to do some pretty nice bossing with it, with 100% more Dust Devil damage. Is pretty disgusting. Relentless Arms Master, they buffed they added a 15% reduced fury cost to your skills while your walking arsenal passive is active. They buffed Gores for the bazillionth time, and then they buffed Ancient's Oath, giving you up to 60%. This is the unique, if I'm not mistaken, that when you do your chains and pull in enemies, you get a damage multiplier. All good stuff for Barb. Next up for Druid. Now, I'm really excited to see what they're doing with the Spirit Bones already. They talked in an interview recently about how some of the other classes, unique things, like Barb being able to equip 4 weapons and its arsenal thing, is a lot stronger than Druid Spirit Bones, and so they seem to be doing another pass at buffing Spirit Bones, this time pretty substantially. They're giving us more max spirit with Gift of the Stag, doubled, 100% more thorns and prickle skin. Here's an interesting one. Advantageous Beast, they reduced the duration of crowd control impairments. They changed it to gaining 15% movement speed and 15% impairment reduction. A lot of the times you would just basically grab the damage from elites, every single time. Now there's an option to straight up while you're leveling, while you're early on, even for endgame and speed clearing, you just swap this over, get 15% more movement speed. Scythe Talons, we got 5% more crit chance. This is actually really nice. That is a lot of crit chance on just one thing. Iron Feather, they're buffing. This was one of our best buffs that we had. It's now going to 20% more max health. My Druid that was at 80,000 HP is now going to be able to reach 90,000 HP pretty easily. Swooping attacks, they gave us another 5% attack speed. Energize, we get more Spirit Restore from. Bolster is going to give us more Fortify based off of our max health. And Obsidian Slam, they reduced the amount of kills for Overpower from 20 to 10. This is pretty massive for any sort of Overpower build. Specifically Pulverize, which we'll talk about in a second. Rabies, they buffed the damage by 25%. Realistically, I still don't think this is going to do all that much for Rabies, unfortunately. Besides, like, speed clearing, like trash mobs and stuff like that. Here's where we get really crazy. They buffed Pulverize damage by 76%. Pulverize, notoriously, very good. Strong build. Struggles on bosses just because it just doesn't have the damage, doesn't have the like upkeep of Overpower to really be good against bosses. That's going to help. 76% more damage, definitely going to help, but it gets even better because Raging Pulverize, enemies overpowered by Pulverize or stunned for 3 seconds, now has a damage. So Pulverize, now you can grab this for 30% increased Overpower damage, and if enemies get overpowered, they're stunned. So now, not only do we get a 76% damage increase, but we got a 30% multiplier on top of it. Pulverize is going to be feeling very nice. Nature's Fury, they chanced to proc, they buffed Perfect Storm. They gave us a higher damage multiplier to those distant enemies. Nature's Reach, they buffed the damage multiplier up to distant enemies, which is also really nice because now an amulet giving +3 to this is going to give you 30% increased damage to distant, which is pretty significant. Toxic Claws, they boosted the buff or the base damage that it does for poison enemies. Quick Shift, they buffed the damage multiplier of. This is another thing that a lot of builds are using, so just more damage for those builds. Increased, they gave us defensive posture, so now we get damage reduction while fortified, as well as increased fortify sources. That's actually going to be pretty nice to grab. Mending, while in werebear form, we get additional healing, and all sources gain increased max life. So that's going to be interesting in werebear form. Provocation, this is also a really nice buff. I put out a setup for a Hurricane Druid, and the tough thing about the Hurricane Druid was timing it so that you would have to be in werebear form for 16 seconds. Now you only need to be in werebear form for 12 seconds to get those guaranteed overpowers. This is going to just make the build feel a lot better, in my opinion, because you're not going to have to wait as long, and you're not tempering, like, max duration on your Hurricane isn't going to be as important, like getting as much duration as possible. Still going to be a huge multiplier, but like you won't have a thing where you like hit a temper and it's just not enough so that you can't get 100% uptime. Now basically any build that's trying to do Hurricane overpower snapshots will be able to keep up 100% uptime of overpower Hurricane. Trampled Earth, they buffed the damage that the landslides do when they come out from your trampling, which is pretty nice. Subterranean, they buffed by another 5%. All right. Aspect of the Alpha got a 15% damage increase to companions. Companion Druid, actually pretty good this season. It's actually one of my favorite builds that I've played. The damage that they can do is pretty nutty. We got them hitting for about 90 million on a click, and that still like it was pretty far from min-max. That wasn't like anything over like an 8 masterwork. So pretty cool things that you can do with companions. Insatiated, they buffed up shred damage by a little bit. Still don't think this is going to do that much just because shred's not very good this season. Constricting Tendrils, they gave us a 30% buff to Constricting Tendrils legendary node. Still don't think that's worth using. And the Dominate Glyph, they buffed by 3%. Once again, now we've got the Pulverize damage, Pulverize multiplier, Pulverize takes 10 less kills to guaranteed overpower, and another damage multiplier to overpower. They just buffed the daylights out of Pulverize out of the blue, so that's pretty cool. Next up, we get to Necromancer. Sorry, I'm a little sick. They buffed Necromancer's sacrifice bonuses, so more crit chance, more all res, more shadow damage, which is nice for that shadow damage build that we showed. Shadow Mage Sacrifices, more essence, now also gives you more essence generation. Cold Mage Sacrifice, more vulnerable, more overpower, more attack speed, more max life, more crit damage. Basically incentivizing more non-minion builds. In the Paragon node, the Blood Begets Blood Legendary node, they buffed up by double, so that's to 30%. Blood Drinker Glyph, more max life. Desecration, more shadow damage. Gravekeeper gives you more damage per close corpse. A lot of builds went this, so there's just more damage for many builds on Necromancer. Sacrificial Aspect, your sacrifice bonuses are increased. That's buffed up by over up to double now, which is pretty nice. Once again, looks like they're really trying to incentivize non-minion builds as well. Shielding Storm, each time that Bone Storm damages an enemy, gain a barrier. Now each time that Bone Storm damages an enemy, gain a barrier equal to 6% of your max life. Oh wow, this scales off of max life rather than base life now. That's going to be really strong for survivability for Necros. Next up, we get to Rogue. Twisting Blade's been in the mud for a while. They buffed up the initial damage and the return damage, like a 40% damage buff to Twisting Blades. Flurry, they buffed the damage of. I don't think that's really going to do too much for Flurry. Honestly, it's really great at like doing other things and proccing stuff, not as great for damage, at least from what I've been playing. Exposure, Lucky Hit no longer requires direct damage to proc, and now also work on damage over time effects. That's very nice. Sturdy, more damage reduction. They're doing a few things here to like buff up the survivability of Rogue, which is pretty nice. While Stealth, you heal for a percentage of your life now. On the Paragon, versatility, non-basic and non-core skill damage increased by up to 10%. Fluidity Glyph, whenever you cast an agility skill, you'd gain increased energy regen. Now you get increased damage and increased energy regen. The Explosive Glyph gives you more damage reduction from when hitting enemies with like your explosive skills. Diminished Glyph was hitting enemies with, I think, or vulnerable enemies. Now is going to give you 15% DR. Blade Dancers, damage increased up to 80%. That's pretty massive. Artful Initiative, energy required to drop grenades reduced from 100 to 75, and grenade damage increased by 50%. And Aspect of Surprise, grenade damage increased by 200%. Trickster's Aspect, grenade damage increased by 50%. If I'm not mistaken, Grenade Rogue was pretty strong. It wasn't like a top build for Rogue, but it was pretty strong this season. All of these things are going to make a Grenade Rogue seem pretty interesting. They did this change, which is awesome. The Umbrous Aspect is one of the best defensive aspects for the Rogue. It reads that you need to get crit strikes with marksman skills to get free stacks of Dark Shroud. Dark Shroud is one of Rogue's best survivability skills, providing just flat DR. Now, any critical strikes will give it. It doesn't need to be with marksman skills. That opens up a lot of build diversity, and a lot more builds will be using this because now any build can just build up free Dark Shroud stacks, which is awesome. Aerostorm damage increased both by the base damage and its multiplier. Vengeful Aerostorm damage increased by 30%. They buffed up Eyes in the Dark. Death Trap now gets increased damage and will rearm it second time. It doesn't like have like a condition. It just got guaranteed rearms. Saboteur's Signet, grenade damage increased by 50%, even more grenade buffs. And then we get to Sorc. Sorc is getting buffs to Ice Armor, increased from 30% of base life to 25% of max life. So huge buff for Ice Armor. Shimmering Teleport duration increased. I think that's the DR from when you teleport. Incinerate, they buffed the DR from, which is interesting. I still think more Incinerate buffs are probably needed. Potent Warding no longer excludes basic skill casts, so you just get casts, and then you'll be able to build up resistances. Glass Cannon, now you take less damage from. Any other big ones? Conduction, they increased the movement speed, duration of, and the amount of movement speed that you get. Electrocution, that you get more DR from. Warmth, you get more healing per nearby burning enemy and boss. Inner Flames, they buffed the damage up to healthy enemies. Avalanche got 15% increased damage. Combustion got increased damage per unique source of burning. Some more good stuff for burning builds. Essu's Ferocity got even more crit chance. Shatter, which was kind of doing some broken things with burn damage, got a 5% damage multiplier increase. That's pretty nice. And Veer's Mastery, the bonus damage is increased by 5%, and your bonus crit is increased by another 5%. Seems like some nice buffs to Sorc. Nothing like overly too crazy. I'm surprised to see so many like massive buffs. Let's see what we get down to the legendary aspects. Concentration damage reduction increased just by 5%. You get an additional bounce with chain lightning. Overwhelming courage increased. Cast additional shock increased by 10%. So that's pretty nice. Cast extra shock skills. I don't think there's many builds that use that though. Whoa, Mage's Lord gives you it would go up to 27%, but now it's tripled while fighting a close enemy, so it's just easier to proc that. Aspect of Shattered Stars, more damage for your meteorites. Aspect of Frozen Memories, additional cast. Battle Casters, max stacks increased. Flame Scar Embers increased by 35%. Okay, so I guess they did do a small buff. To Incinerate. Essador's Overflowing Cameo, damage increased from for every 100 intelligence. From 50 to 60. That's actually pretty nice with how much intelligence you can stack up. Staff of Endless Rage. Bonus damage increased by 10%. Gloves of the Illuminator. Damage penalty reduced by 5%. Interesting. So, kind of highlights of balance changes. Rogue grenade builds looking really good. Sacrifice minion builds, or like non-minion necromancer builds, looking like they got a ton of buffs. Also shadow damage buffs and overpower damage stuff. Druid, pulverize all day, every day. Pulverize is going to be crazy. And then Barb, Whirlwind, Dust Devils. Those are kind of like the big standout patch changes. And then we get to endgame bug fixes. They like fixed Holy Bolt's Elixir, so it's not going to be dealing based off of enemy health. They fixed Boulder again. I think this has got to be the 5th time that they've fixed Boulder. It's still not going to work, unfortunately. It reads, fixed an issue where casting boulders with Dolmen Stone would cause it to not cast at all. Boulders now have a limit of 10, but their damage is increased by 10% for each boulder. The issue with Boulder right now is the temper that reads, when you cast Boulder, you have a chance to cast an additional boulder. It goes up to 50%, right? That's like a 50% damage increase for the build. The boulders that are cast from that aspect, or that temper, don't deal damage. So we're missing out on like 50% damage on the build. Until that's fixed, I still don't know if I'd recommend playing Boulder. I'm going to be honest with you. I messed around with it. It just doesn't feel very good. And in this game right now, there's a lot of resources to respec and rework your build. I would probably still recommend holding out on like full sending into Boulder. Personally, they fixed an issue with rapid fire with Scoundrel's Kiss equipped. Players couldn't properly hit close targets and could sometimes fire projectiles beyond the player. This also increases the radius of explosives by 25%. So a bit of a fix for the rapid fire Scoundrel's Kiss rogue, and also 25% AoE is really nice. And fix an issue where pets were being counted as minions in various cases. This was kind of an indirect buff to like Shepherd aspect Druid, and a indirect nerf to minion necromancers, or like non-minion necromancers. So pretty good changes there all around. Once again, this is a mid-season patch, but I don't think I saw a single nerf. They're very clearly like allowing the top builds to stay top builds, but they're buffing up a lot of things that were underperforming. I still would like to see a lot of different changes for Druid in other areas. I'm still underperforming. I hate the fact that we no longer have like a poison detonation. We used to have the Changeling, which could detonate poison. We had Blurred Beast, which could detonate poison. Now we've finally got builds that can stack up poison, and we got no way to detonate it, which is kind of a bummer. But overall, I think good changes. Let me know what you think. I'm gonna honestly hop on my Endariel's rogue and start doing some billions and billions of damage with Endariel's explosions, and then I'm gonna be popping over to Druid to probably try Pulverize. And yeah, guys, that is it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. A little bit of me rambling, but yeah, good patch notes. I'll catch you all in the next one. Take care. Peace.